Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Tuesday, July 30th, 2024. I am John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
And media commentary columnist Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John.
So much to talk about today. We're going to talk about weirdness. We're going to talk about the Supreme Court. We're going to talk about Lebanon. We're going to talk about Kamala Harris. We're going to talk about J.D. Vance. Maybe we should start with Joe Biden's Supreme Court proposal, which is dead on arrival, although his response to being told it was dead on arrival last night was to say that Speaker of the House Mike Johnson was dead on arrival, whatever that meant. So clever, really. A fantastic comeback. I don't suppose we should really be making fun of his incapacity to come up with good comebacks, but the fact that he issued this proposal, which doesn't have a prayer of passage, legislative proposals to fundamentally change the Constitution, makeup, process, and deliberation style strategy of the Supreme Court, do not have a prayer of passage in the House. Therefore, it is some kind of SOP or some kind of effort to introduce this into the common discussion, or it is a marker for the future. If the Democrat Party has now put itself, as it has been over the last 7 years, drawing the line where the idea is that the Supreme Court that definitively went conservative around 2017 is illegitimate, not only because of its views and the radicalism supposedly of its decisions, but also because its members are corrupt because they do things like fly around on planes owned by rich people. Something, by the way, that we do not.
Well, Kamala endorsed it, so I think it is a future thing.
Well, it's a future thing that she may propose. Like,
no, but she said
wanted, yeah. But the Republican Party wanted their, to end abortion for 50 years, and it didn't happen. These are a series of legislative remedies, at least one or two of which are unquestionably, wildly unconstitutional.
But there is a context here, which is he did already once punt on his far left wanting to pack the court. In 2021, he formed a commission, which is what politicians always do when they don't want to address a problem for real. They stick a bunch of people on a commission and say, oh, come up with some solutions. My wonderful colleague Adam White at AEI was on that commission. And when he was asked today or yesterday by the Wall Street Journal about what he thought of this proposal, he pointed out that they discussed a lot of this stuff when they were on the commission, particularly court packing. But if this is something that going forward, if Harris wins, the Harris administration would pursue, it would tie, particularly the appointing new judges every 2 years and having 18-year term limits, would tie the Supreme Court nomination process very directly to presidential politics, which is not a great idea considering how divided and polarized our country is on that issue. So I'm kind of with Seth here, because if this was just a way to punt, he's already done that once. So and the fact that Harris is signing on suggests that her left flank is very keen on some of these reforms, which, as you say, are never going to happen, but still as a signaling device.
There is no question that the left is very keen on this. And just go through history. The history is that the Supreme Court was, from the 1950s until the 1980s, a liberal bastion that advanced liberal social, political, and cultural orthodoxies almost in legislative means. And this is something about which the Democrats, liberals, and the overwhelming consensus of the chattering classes is very proud of. Brown v. Board, decisions to restrict religion in schools, and of course Roe v. Wade, among many, 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 many other decisions. And then beginning in the 80s with Reagan's appointments to the court, moving on to the then a kind of pause because George H.W. Bush's picks to the court were kind of a gimme, like a trade, because Souter ended up being a liberal, but Thomas, of course, ended up being the the most conservative justice. Clinton appointed judge. Only in 2017 did the court definitively move to the right with, and in the course of the Trump administration, with the appointments of Brett Kavanaugh, Neil Gorsuch, and Amy Coney Barrett. And there is now a firm conservative majority on the court. And the minute that happened, the court became illegitimate. And enormous amounts of money have been spent. There is an organization called ProPublica. ProPublica is a nonprofit news gathering investigative organization funded by very left-wing Democrats to the tune of tens of millions of dollars a year. And their obsessive focus over the last 3 years has been this idea that Clarence Thomas in particular, though not him exclusively, is a tool of a particular billionaire named Harlan Crow. Harlan Crow is a donor to Commentary, very small, large donor to AI, where Christine works, and a friend of Clarence Thomas's, and he likes to hang out with Clarence Thomas, and Clarence Thomas doesn't have money, so he takes him on trips. And the issue here is, this is a terrible ethical lapse and violation because Clarence Thomas is in the pocket of Harlan Crow. No one has ever been able to lay out what it is that Harlan Crow is getting from Clarence Thomas. What jurisprudence Clarence Thomas is issuing, since he is often in the minority, even or in a kind of corner of the majority, and not writing majority opinions that lay out, the future jurisprudence of the United States. What it is,
right? It's worth noting that he's often objecting to his own side when they win a case. When they have when his own side has the majority, he's rarely,
right. Generally speaking, quid pro quos involve a quo to the quid. The quid, we know. The quid is a quid. The quid is that Harlan Crow is financially supportive of Clarence Thomas in certain ways. The quo is nothing, except that Clarence Thomas is an extraordinarily conservative justice. And so this idea has arisen that there should be ethics reporting requirements on the Supreme Court. And that is in this legislation proposed by Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island. And I suppose of all of the things that could happen, there could be some kind of agreement by the Supreme Court without legislation that it will issue some form of ethics, do some form of formal ethics reporting the way Congress and the White House do.
But it does.
Congress doesn't. It does, but not. Yes. Go ahead.
So the idea here, I think, is that the court would be accountable to other courts to adjudicate whether or not justices have lived up to the new ethics code. Right? That's my understanding.
Right.
I mean,
they want it enforceable.
The whole thing is ridiculous because the Supreme Court is a co-equal branch of the federal government to Congress and to the White House. That means that the president doesn't write rules about the Congress. The Congress doesn't write rules about the presidency, though it funds the presidency, and it doesn't write rules about Congress, though it doesn't write rules about the Supreme Court, though it has some funding power
and
over
some
the Supreme
oversight.
Court.
There is some oversight power.
There is some oversight, and it has oversight over who gets on the Supreme Court. That is the advice and consent clause, and it has oversight over the personnel of the executive branch, and the executive branch gets to veto laws passed by the legislature, and the Supreme Court is an anti-democratic institution. It was designed by the founders to be an anti-democratic institution with lifetime tenure, which of course is fundamentally anti-democratic, so that it could adjudicate matters outside the realm of politics. That is the design of the Supreme Court. It has been understood to be the design of the Supreme Court. And now that policies are being promulgated that liberals don't like, the court now must be brought to heel under the political aegis of pretty much of the Congress and of the presidency, because the president will appoint these justices every 2 years that serve 18-year terms. And of course, Congress will have to advise and consent on those nominations, creating a constant political battle between the parties, depending on who has what power when, over this court. First of all, aside from everything else, we need more of those. What we really need is more Supreme Court battles. Those are really healthy for this country. The Kavanaugh fight was really great for this country. Accusing Amy Coney Barrett of being a religious fanatic because she was part of a conservative prayer group, that is really healthy for this country.
The guy these plans are being written for, Thomas, has the most conspicuous history of, a proof of what happens when you politicize the court. Everybody on this court has had to go through Joe Biden.
Right.
He was a senator and on the Judiciary Committee.
Except for the three because he was all Trump's nominees. He did not have anything to do with. Although,
but as a senator, the ones he's complaining about had to go through him. So it smacks of, I never forget a slight. It smacks of a sort of retributive mindset, which is he tried pulling out all the stops to stop Thomas when he was nominated, and he failed in doing so. And he's never stopped looking for ways to get Thomas off the court. There's this sort of openly vengeful sense to the way that Democrats look at guys who have been on the court now for decades, where they don't really accept it. The other thing I would say, by the way, is that we should remember that that Joe Biden said initially that his college tuition bailout was not within his powers. And then eventually he went ahead and did it. Barack Obama said it'd be unconstitutional to single-handedly change the immigration laws and allow the Dreamers to stay and all that stuff. And then after the election, he did it because there was no other way, because Congress wasn't going to do it. So I think that we have to remember that, this idea that, even when they themselves think that something is unconstitutional, they quickly reverse themselves and do it anyway after being on the record saying it's unconstitutional. So I think we should take these sorts of plans very seriously, because the last few administrations we've had Democrats say, I don't have the power to do this, and then a year or two later do it. And this is exactly the sort of thing that happens if the filibuster is ever on the chopping block and you can do something in one swipe and say, you know what, I'm going to do it and let the courts stop me. And that only helps their argument, because their argument is that the courts are corrupt and the courts are only trying to stop them.
I agree with Seth on that level. I think the whole move can be a number of things at once. I think on a basic level, it's, the Democrats wanted the court to do all sorts of things for it that it didn't do. It was supposed to stop Trump. It was supposed to rule certain ways on certain policies. It was supposed to save Roe. So there's just this lashing out at it. It's also a huge part of the Democrats' election argument this year. They're preserving the country by fixing this derelict runaway Supreme Court. But I think Seth's right that ultimately it's one of those things that they introduce into the conversation, and you wait for that power grab moment, and like an Obama sort of power grab moment, and then they can get a chunk of their wish list in.
Yeah, Biden's rhetoric here in his statement and in the Washington Post editorial that was published is worth really paying attention to. He called the way that the court is acting, which is, as John, as you pointed out, in their constitutionally appropriate role, as a breach, not normal. Again, trying to, and of course, because he has a compliant media, which generally does support the left's version of what the court should be doing as an activist court, there isn't a lot of pushback on that. And Leonard Leo, the Federalist Society, actually issued a pretty fiery statement in response to this proposal, as have others on the right. But there is a sense in which rebranding the court as yet another rogue branch of government, and the Democrats as the only people who can save the country from itself, that's falling on, a lot of perfectly legitimate ears, particularly among young voters who don't understand how the court is supposed to work. And actually their experience of the court is they see it as a political institution when it is decidedly not one. So I wonder if a lot of this is also campaign messaging in an election year on behalf of...
It's total campaign messaging. It's an effort to raise anew, without seeming like you are yesteryearing everything, Dobbs. So they won they had a surprisingly successful midterm election, largely because of the Dobbs decision that ended the constitutional right to an abortion. That was, they got one election out of it. They would like to get two, but what are they just going to talk about Dobbs? I mean, they can talk about states in which now abortion is basically banned from conception, but I don't know. So what they're doing here is shoehorning back the abortion question in, using an institutional attack and saying that the way Republicans are behaving is illegitimate. And that ties to abortion, it ties to Trump, it ties to their arguments about illegitimacy. But let's talk about legitimacy and illegitimacy for a moment. The Harris campaign is going to press what the Biden campaign was going to press, which is that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. He is making claims that delegitimize elections, threaten our very constitutional fabric and our social fabric with his irresponsible charges of vote fixing and all of that. The institutional threat to the United States as posed by these ideas that they are promulgating here is, and have been since Barack Obama started in 2014, after the 2010 elections, lost in the House, and after the 2014 election, lost in the Senate, saying, I am just going to implement policies that otherwise everyone understood for the last 230 years have had to come through the legislature. I'm just going to implement them. I've got a pen and a phone, and I am going to use the power of the Chevron deference system to make administrative law without any legislature saying anything about immigration, college tuition, various other things. And he had his hat handed to him over and over and over again, as Biden has, doing the same thing. But this was something new. The idea was the American people voted in people I don't like. I'm going to do it anyway. And now we've had a constitutional process for 240 years that involves how we choose people in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is now doing things we don't like. So we are going to revolutionize the nature of the Supreme Court without a constitutional amendment, without rewriting Article 2, which governs the conduct of the courts. Well, you could pass constitutional amendment saying there should be 47 Supreme Court justices, or it should be every 2 years, or there should be an 18-year term limit. All of that passed as a constitutional amendment would be inarguable. That's what constitutional amendments are. They're the new fabric, or the new framework that we live under. Or you can pass legislation that passes constitutional muster. And a lot of this in theory, by the way, an 18-year term limit is probably unconstitutional, because the Constitution says that you should serve under good, I can't remember the actual wording, but it has been understood from time immemorial to mean a lifetime appointment to the court, and so you couldn't just overturn that with a piece of legislation. But there are other things that you could have legislatively. When FDR wanted to pack the court in 1937, the number of justices at the Supreme Court was not fixed, has never been fixed. It was kind of frozen by common agreement after the Civil War at 9, and it has been 9 since, I think, 1867. as westward expansion was happening. And so here we stand, and it's just one of those things where hypocrisy and irony merge, because they are the ones who are delegitimizing American government. This is the structure of our government, and they are delegitimizing it. There are all sorts of things they did that don't delegitimize anything. Getting rid of the filibuster. The filibuster was a Senate minhag, as we say. It was a Senate tradition set up for complicated reasons, and it had all sorts of virtues, and it was a mistake to get rid of it in many ways. But that was simply a rule of the Senate. It wasn't, holy writ or anything like that. This comes as close to holy writ as we have. That is the constitutional order governing the makeup of the Supreme Court and the relation between the legislature and the executive and the judiciary. And Biden just announces on a Monday that the Democratic Party and his chosen successor are now going to openly advocate for a revolution in the courts that will place the courts under the direct political jurisdiction, as Christine said, of the Congress and the presidency as it grows in size. Remember, we're talking about adding a justice every 2 years.
Right. That's the other thing. Is
in
that
18 years, so that serves for 18 years. So if you do the math, in 36 years, 18 new justices will be added to the court before they start falling off. So we're going to get 45 justices.
Well, we don't know that the ones that are on the court now are exempted from the 18-year term rule, though.
Right. But even let's say they are. Let's say they're not. Let's say they're not, and they just die out of office.
No matter how you
slice it, the minute that this starts, there will be 20 some odd, 30, 40, I don't even know how you count justices on the Supreme Court.
Can I be Abe for a second and say
the court.
It's actually worse than that? I'm going to be Abe for a second, because
my math is so bad. That's embarrassing. That's like an SAT question.
I have to remind you once again that we are not allowed to do math on this podcast.
Thank you.
There was a ban in place.
But that was fundamental. Unlike the filibuster, which is not fundamental to our nation's founding. No math on journalist podcasts actually is. It's even worse though, because what they're doing is what this plan would do if they passed it would ensure that the Supreme Court is forever deemed illegitimate. Because what happens when you're adding a Supreme Court justice or justices every 2 years is that every presidential term has two of those moments where you add justices. And if you're in office for 8 years, it's more than that. But every president has constitutional challenges to their executive actions and to legislation they championed that, and signed that may have been passed by Congress, but that was obviously there's like aspects of Obamacare, for example. Obama owned that, even though it was technically legislation. It came from the executive branch. The power from that came from the executive branch, and the name and all that. Every president is challenged by the courts. Trump is challenged by the courts when he ties his shoes in the morning. Every president is challenged by the courts. If those sitting presidents are in charge of appointing Supreme Court justices twice a term, it will focus all the appointments and all the hearings on the exact issues that are now before the court. In other words, in the past, if you had somebody on who's been on the
right now, the classic thing that justices or potential justices, including judges, say when they go before the Senate Judiciary Committee is, I cannot talk about matters that are currently in adjudication before the courts. That is how they've dealt with it. So you get then that kind of thing of, what do you think about abortion? And David Souter says, I've never had a thought about abortion.
I mean, that actually is probably true in
Yeah.
his case. But can
Okay,
I
but
add one
yeah.
other? There's
Yeah.
one other historical. If we step back and look at this historically, when conservatives lost, conservative justices were no longer dominant on the court. The conservative legal movement formed, and over decades of cultivation, largely through groups like the Federalist Society, but others, made a concerted effort to cultivate law students, a legal philosophy through journals and law review articles and all kinds of scholarly work to lay the foundation for a future court that would represent the interests of conservative legal philosophy. They did that in a very conservative way. They built institutions, they built an intellectual groundwork for that, and then they cultivated people who thought that this was actually more in keeping with what our founders wanted from our Constitution. And that was like a 30, maybe even 40-year project.
50?
50, yeah. So when the left
the
left gets a conservative court for a few years, suddenly it's like, let's blow this sucker up and rebuild from the ashes.
And you know,
I mean,
where this all started. I hate to put it this way. Where this all started was in the pages of Commentary and the Public Interest, the two neoconservative magazines of the late 60s and early 70s. Much of the early writing about the runaway nature of the liberal jurisprudence of the U.S. Supreme Court, not only under Earl Warren, but Justice William O. Douglas and others, came not from firebrand right-wingers who were homeschooled, but from skeptical atheist Jews at Yale Law School and others, particularly a professor named Alexander Bickel, who tragically died very young at the age of 45, and wrote in Commentary some of the most remarkable and prescient material about how the court under Warren Burger and Earl Warren and its liberal jurisprudence from the 1950s onward was increasingly separating itself from any root in our constitutional order, in legislative language, in what the Constitution said. And that this antinomianism, or this kind of cloud cuckoo land, this is the America we want to live in. And so we are going to find rights that are nowhere enumerated in law or in the Constitution, was very dangerous, because it meant that there was all of law depends in part on understanding that there is a connection to common sense, mens rea. Ordinary people need to be able to understand what the law is so that they can live within its confines, and that the courts were separating themselves from any anchor in American tradition, law, anything. That was not Commentary was not yet a conservative publication. The Public Interest was run by a liberal from Harvard and Irving Kristol. These were not, Project 2025. This was, whoa, hold on there, buckaroo. You guys are going crazy, and something has got to restrain you, because the structure of our order, this is what's interesting, what's happening now. There's no restraint on you. You're the Supreme Court. You say something is constitutional, it's constitutional. The only way to overturn your understanding of what is constitutional is for there to be a constitutional amendment revising your opinion. That's too much power. You are not restraining yourself. You have to learn how to restrain yourself. And that was the beginning of the conservative legal movement. And from those early articles in 1970, 1971, it was 55, 56 years until the court went 6-3 conservative. So it's not just that institutions were built. This was built on the foundation of a counter revolution based on the idea that, left to its own devices, the U.S. Supreme Court was becoming an undemocratic institution, as an undemocratic institution, was now writing laws that it had no right to write, shall we say. And so that's the intellectual history of this. And I'm sorry, but just to finish out this thought, to have those people, I think, Trump should have been impeached and convicted over January 6th. I believe that he should probably, I don't think this case is ever going to go forward. Now it's really complicated. I think that the case against him on January 6th in the Tanya Chutkan courtroom by Jack Smith is a reasonably strong case. So I am not on Trump's side on his delegitimizing of the 2020 election. But to hell with you people. I am not getting lectures from you on the illegitimacy of Trump and how he's destroying democracy. When you are destroying democracy, the president and the are seeking to destroy our constitutional framework.
This is why it's important that one of the things that Biden did yesterday was to also propose a constitutional amendment to say that to make clear, I think the words way I wrote it down, make clear that there is no immunity for crimes a former president committed while in office. So that's never going to happen, obviously. But this idea that he's making that argument, saying the court overreached, that's deliberately misrepresenting what the court's decision in that immunity case said. It was extremely limited. It was very careful in how it certainly did not say presidents can do whatever they want when in office. And we had this discussion when that decision first came down. He is deliberately misrepresenting the court, portraying it as having done something deeply radical and potentially unconstitutional, when that is not what happened.
I also
why are we even there? Why did we even have that decision in front of the court? Because of institutional overreach on the part of Democrats by turning this case. Trump summoning a golem of a legal case, some sort of like Walking Dead zombie legal case that was obviously trumped up, that was, no pun intended, that was obviously, taken a legitimate core and decided that before we get to the legitimate case, we're going to build a bridge from misdemeanors to felonies, and we're going to walk across that bridge together, and we're going to walk across that bridge 32 times. And we're here because the cases that brought us here were brought by Democrats. They are flimsy, and obviously so, and troublingly so, because after Trump was convicted of 300 counts of being a jerk, you had Democratic leaning or center left legal analysts say, don't love this, right? This is not just like a right wing Claremont Institute thing, the discomfort with some of what's been used against Trump in the courts. And this is why that decision came about in the first place. So what you have is Democrats sort of creating a crisis and then saying, oh, there's a crisis, we got to solve it. And then solving that crisis by further, delegitimizing things and causing a new crisis. And then 5 years down the line, we'll see what they have to do about that crisis.
And here's also why we need to treat them with contempt and say, to hell with you people. Because while they were having a cow over the finding that the president was immune from prosecution for some official acts, which seems as logical a thing as you can imagine, which is as the court's majority decision said, a president should not be making decisions about the future of the country, worried that when he leaves office, he is going to be arrested for the decisions that he is making on policy grounds. So we can't just say a president can be arrested for his acts in office. Congress, by the way, exists under a writ in the speech and debate clause of immunity from a lot of what it does in the courts, both civilly and criminally, so that Congress can debate laws without fear of being thrown in jail for how it has these conversations. At the same time that everybody was having a cow over the immunity decision, the Supreme Court issued two other decisions drastically limiting executive power. One is called Loper-Bright, and the other is called Jarchese. And what they say is that what Loper-Bright did was overturn so-called Chevron deference, which I mentioned earlier. That is the idea that in the absence of incredibly clearly defined language in legislation that federal agencies have to implement or administer, the agencies themselves need to be granted vast deference in how they interpret and enforce those laws, in how they write regulations. And Chevron deference became the means by which Obama used his phone and his pen to declare, legalization or normalization or whatever it was for millions of immigrants or parents or kids or whatever, and various other things. And the court said Chevron deference is overturned. Made sense at the time. It's gone too far. The power of the executive is unconstrained here, and it needs to be constrained by courts and by legislatures. Legislatures need to do a better job doing what they do so that this stuff doesn't happen anymore. And so that is the most restraining piece of legislation, that's the most restraining decision in the realm of executive power that we have seen in decades. In decades. Have you heard a peep from liberals saying, well, thank God, Trump may become president and he wants to be a dictator. Thank God that Loper Bright passed so that he can't just use his executive agencies to round up liberals and send them to jail. They haven't said a word because they don't care. They like Loper Bright as long as Loper Bright is their piece of legislation. As long as Chevron deference works in their favor, they love it. It's great. They're hypocrites. They don't mean any of this. They don't think that they think Clarence Thomas is corrupt because no one is supposed to be friends with a rich person except Bill Clinton flying on Jeffrey Epstein's plane. But fine, whatever. That's life. To hell with you people. You're all hypocrites and liars and disingenuous. Sheldon Whitehouse is a monster and an idiot and a crazy person. And the very fact that the president of the United States is deferring to Sheldon Whitehouse's ridiculous legislation itself is a shanda and an embarrassment.
Can we talk about how you think it plays politically?
I think it goes over everybody's head, to be honest. Right?
I think there's a way to happy talk it on the Democrats' part that could be effective. They just sidestepping the destruction of our foundational system. They talk, well, these are really actually sensible, much needed.
That's Democratic happy talk.
Right.
The destruction of our.
Right.
Oh,
okay.
right.
Can they happy talk it? Yes. I'm saying, does it have any electoral effect one way or the other? Probably not, because it's too wonky.
No.
Okay, I'm wrong?
Because
Okay,
they're gonna use it. They're not gonna get into the wonky. It's gonna be, look, fear and anger are two very motivating forces, and they're gonna say, if we don't do this, the court will take over all of your rights. All the rights talk, which Kamala has been the leading edge of when she was vice president, going around and telling groups of women, you will be stripped of your rights. You will have no rights. You're telling journalists they're going to be rounded up and sent to some sort of journalistic gulag, where actually my recommendation would be that they be made to do work with their actual hands. But that's another issue. But this kind of fear, the fear of the court is what they're trying to sow. This is an out of control branch of government, and the only way to tame it is for us to have these, serious reforms.
Okay, so then you can go, and this is the sad part. I'm sorry, I know that a lot of people are, feeling good about Trump, but this is the sad part about Trump being the nominee, because there is a counter argument, there is a counter press to be made. And the counter press to be made is that the Democrats are trying to seize the Supreme Court to turn it into their vassal slave state and do whatever they want, whenever they want to. And they have to be stopped, because the Supreme Court should not be, a star chamber, and should not be able to just sort of wave its hand and change America however it wants to. And he's not good at that. He won't be good at making that case. And so, unfortunately, they might have the better of it. Although the case is fantastic. I'm sorry. It's like, this is all Democrats ever do. They change the rules in midstream. Here's the rule. Men compete in men's tournaments and women compete in women's tournaments. No, that's fine. Somebody born a male who has his penis cut off or doesn't, and says he's a female, now can run in a women's tournament in the middle. Now we're changing the rules. People have done it this way forever. They change the rules whenever they want to change
Electoral college
the rules.
too. They lose because of when they lose a couple times because of the electoral college. Literally changed the way we do elections.
Okay, so I'm just saying, like, this is all they ever want to do is change the rules. And you know what? We have rules for a reason. That's one of the things of being somebody who is not a liberal believes, is that we have rules and they function. Now, again, Trump, not the best person to make that argument. He's a disruptor and a revolutionary and all of that.
Well,
That's part of the problem.
But on this, he's actually an apprentice level thinker, right? All he likes to do is talk about how good his judicial picks were. It's like, that she was great. Isn't she great? Look, I chose her. I mean, he doesn't get beyond that in terms of legal philosophy.
Okay. But I'm just saying, if there were actually an argument to be had about this proposal versus what it says and what it means, the right would win. The right would win that argument in a sort of like a intellectual, in an IQ squared debate, because it's a terrible argument. Seth, you laid out, I think, finally, every way in which a court can be corrupted, the Supreme Court can be corrupted by this proposal. Throughout the 19th century, the Supreme Court was a backwater, embarrassing institution in the United States because politicians threw their rivals onto the court to give them a lifetime appointment, or got rid of troublesome people by putting them on the court, or did somebody a favor by putting them on the court. And the jurisprudence of the United States in the 19th century was embarrassing and humiliating. No major great decisions were written, pretty much after like 1809 by the court. The court, of course, most famously wrote Dred Scott. It wrote Plessy versus Ferguson. These were politicized decisions by hack judges who were political operatives, and they set America back 100 years. And it was really, really, really bad. And now you're going to have a president with 2 18-year appointments in his pocket. What's he going to do with them? This guy might run against me and beat me in a primary. I better put him on the Supreme Court. This guy, this woman, is trouble with a capital T, screwing up Congress. Her name is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I'll put her on the Supreme Court. Then I get her out of the mix. I'm going to do Hakeem Jeffries a favor. This is what happens to the court because of the preciousness of these appointments. Turning them into political goodies, which is what judgeships are at the state and local level, is just, they're too valuable to be horse traded like that. That will be over with in 5 seconds. You're in for 8 years, you get 4 of them. It's like draft picks. And then you could trade them. You could say, you know what? Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put Senator so-and-so on the court so that the governor of his state can appoint The Rock to, to the seat because we really need to win the next election. I mean, that is the kind of calculus that will be instantly part of the political conversation if it were
earlier in Biden's term. There was a whole conversation from Democrats about whether he should put Harris on the court because she was dragging down the ticket. Right? There were concerns that Harris was dragging down the ticket as a vice president. So get Sotomayor to retire, replace her with Kamala Harris, pick a new vice president who will help you win the election, right? That was like this grand scheme, except this plan makes it the reality like every day.
Right. Exactly. Okay. Now let's talk a little bit about the summer and heat, because it's been hot, as you know, and you're tossing, you're turning, you're unable to get comfortable in bed because you're just too hot. You know what you need to do? You need to follow our friend Abe here and go to Boll & Branch to help you never sleep hot again with sheets that are woven to allow airflow and feel cool and crisp to the touch, perfect for sleepers who run hot. Boll & Branch has amazing options for hot sleepers. Choose from 100% organic cotton percale that's made with a naturally cooling weave, or their linen, which is made from European flax to be light, airy, and softer than soft. The signature hem sheets from Boll & Branch are a bestseller for a reason. They feel buttery to the touch. They're super breathable. They are made with 100% organic cotton using the highest quality thread on earth, and they come in 10 versatile colors in all sizes, from twin up to California king. So Get your coolest, most comfortable sleep with Boll and Branch. Get 15% off plus free shipping on your first set of sheets when you use promo code commentary at bollandbranch.com. That's BOLLANDBRANCH.com. Promo code commentary for 15% off plus free shipping. Exclusions apply. See site for details. Can we talk about weird? I'm in the middle of writing a blog post about weird. The word weird is the soccer mom of the 2024 election. Remember how 2004, all we heard about was soccer moms. We had the waitress mom in 2000.
Don't forget wine mom.
Wine mom was 2012, 2008. Okay.
We did hockey
weird.
moms with Palin, right? Hockey moms.
Yeah, hockey moms. Okay. But now we have weird. So here's the decision that the Democrats have made. Harris tested it out Saturday in one of these rally speeches, and literally 15 different Democrats have said it on TV and in speeches in the last 24 to 48 hours. Tim Walz of Minnesota, Brian Schatz of Hawaii, Eric Swalwell of California. I think Josh Shapiro said it. Others have said it. And then if you go through the MSNBC shill world, you will find that they're all using it too. Jen Psaki, Claire McCaskill, others. They're just weird. The Republicans are weird. This is all weird. So somebody watched last night the White Dudes for Harris Zoom call, which I did not watch. A friend of mine watched it and said, as is true of all Zoom calls, let's be fair, that was one of the weirdest things that he had ever seen. I mean, if we want to talk about weird, we can talk about whether what J.D. Vance said about, moms and childlessness and the dangers posed by childlessness. And we can talk about Trump's joking about Hannibal Lecter and all that. And if that's weird, that's also true. Democrats are endorsing Drag Queen Story Hour. Democrats want Leah Thomas to compete as a woman. Democrats want girls to have their bathrooms in high schools invaded by boys who are pretending to be girls so they can ogle girls in locker rooms. Democrats embrace. I thought weird was good. I thought they love weird. Don't they love weird? Wasn't that the whole point? Make Austin weird, keep Austin weird. Isn't that the slogan of the most progressive city in a red state? Suddenly now weird is bad. I think it's kind of brilliant because they're trying to jump with 99 days left to go. They're trying to jump into a very broad, generalized cultural critique of Trump and Vance that doesn't require much substance. You just say, man, they're weird. They're so weird. Like, do you like weird? I don't like weird people. I know we say we like, but they're just weird. So is this good? Is it bad? Does it have larger meaning? Are they doing it because they know it works? Or are they just like trying to bait Republicans into responding and then being weird in response? Because I will say that when Vivek Ramaswamy comes out and says, we're not weird, I'm already like, well, you know what? This is working because they're drawing fire from exactly the kind of weirdo that they want Americans to say, I don't want to vote for those guys. Christine, as our resident cultural
I was hoping
critic.
I was your resident weirdo, but okay, I'll take culture. No,
you are so not a weirdo. It's
I played the bassoon.
Never met
Come
a
on.
less.
I was I was weird as a child. So this is the thing, is that the rebrand is not going to work in part because I think the voters they're trying to reach don't find it a threat if someone's weird. And also, as you say, these images and you see this all over social media in the last 48 hours, a picture of Vance with his charming and adorable family next to what goes on at a Drag Queen Story Hour, or, someone like who's the Star Trek guy who's become a major Democratic
George
shill.
Takei,
who's like, they're so weird. And a picture of him doing some deeply weird stuff with a couple of radio hosts. So I think the contrast in the visual is going to hit people. And I don't understand why, look, in a highly individualistic society, which the United States still is, weird is good. Weird's always been good. But I think what they're trying to suggest is that their subculture version of weird, which has dominated the left for a very long time, is fine. In fact, they're trying to normalize that throughout the culture. But that anything that's traditional is weird. So it's a weird inversion, because a lot of what they dislike about Vance and what they dislike about conservatives in general is the normie part of conservatism. We go to church, we sit down and have dinner with our families. We actually like things not to be too political, and we don't really want to fight a culture war. They want that rebranded as weird, and I don't think that's going to stick.
All right. So maybe one of the weirdest moments in the Republican convention was Hulk Hogan, right? Hulk Hogan comes out an hour before Trump speaks. He's ranting, he's raving. He's got 3 T-shirts on. He tears one off, then he tears the other one off, does all that. And then he says, I'm not Hulk Hogan. There is no Hulk Hogan. My name is Terry. I can't remember his actual last name. Seth, I depend on you to remember his last name.
Bolay or something.
Yeah,
Boleo.
Terry.
Okay,
Bollea.
thank you. Thank you.
Bollea,
Okay.
Terry Bollea.
Okay. Hulk Hogan is an act. You all know it's an act. I know it's an act. Everybody knows it's an act. What's not an act is Donald Trump, or however he put it. The weirdness on the right, there is genuine weirdness on the right. The weirdness on the right, though, some of the weirdness on the right is very knowing about what it is and what it's doing. And I would even say that Trump is knowing in his weirdness. This repetition of the Hannibal Lecter stuff at the rallies is shtick that he is reusing, because we've constantly compared him to Borscht Belt comedians for the last 8 years, because he knows it gets a laugh and it gets a rise out of the crowd. And every time he does it, Tom Nichols or some, humorous second-rate never Trumper goes, it's terrible that the president of the United States is mentioning Hannibal Lecter, like Hannibal Lecter is some kind of a hero. It's like, really? Like, give me a break for 5 seconds.
But it's the elitism of this rebrand of the weirdness. Yeah. It is an elite. It's a top-down elitist way of looking at the rest of the country. That's why they don't get Hulk Hogan. We all get Hulk Hogan. I grew up in Florida. I definitely get in the 80s. I definitely get Hulk Hogan.
Right.
But they actually look down upon people who enjoy that as spectacle. They look down on those people, and they control the Democratic Party.
No, they like RuPaul. Right. I don't like RuPaul. I'm not a fan of drag. Before drag became political, I'm not a fan of drag performing. Although one of the greatest performances I ever saw was Mark Rylance playing Olivia in Twelfth Night, and it was astounding.
He's an amazing actor,
but it wasn't really drag. That's why it wasn't. It was he was playing a woman. He was playing a grieving woman, and it was astounding. But I'm not a fan of drag, and so I stipulate that. However, whatever you want to say about drag, you could say it's fun and it's amusing and it's really funny, and RuPaul is funny, and it's really funny when all these people come out and they dress in drag. It's weird. The definition of it is weird. It is playing off normality and scoring points off normality. And it makes a lot of people uncomfortable.
Everything that's bad has normative added as a suffix to it, right? Like, this is a cis-normative way of looking at things. This is a heteronormative way. We made fun of Ashkenormativity once on this podcast. We had our friend Liel on. So the implicit, and most of the time it's not even implicit. I think it's explicit, which is this idea that the things that we believe are normal are a constructed reality that has been built by people with power over you.
Right. I want to go back to the Zoom call.
By the way, we should. There's been too much
for Harris. Yeah. Go ahead.
I just want to say there's been too much Dustin Hoffman erasure on this stuff. On Tootsie. Yeah, he should. He's not coming up at all in the conversation, and I think that.
Fair enough. Well, Tootsie is a movie about how a man realizes that he's a man by becoming a woman or something like that. And it doesn't really jibe with our current understanding of either men or women. But to talk about the white dudes for Harris call, So I saw bits of clips of it all night. And I'm sorry, that was weird. Like Jeff Bridges was on the call. He's again, Zoom, right? So everyone's weird on Zoom. He's leaning back in a chair. He's got this big, thick beard. And I mean, I will not say that he was, because I don't really know, but his affect was that he was stoned out of his mind while he was talking about how this is so important, man, that we are in the American civic discourse doing this stuff. White dudes for Trump, women, childless women, white dudes for Biden. These white women for Harris, white dudes for Harris, all of that. That is a violation of our civic norms. This affinity group public fundraising game. That is not normal. That is new. Maybe it'll be successful. Maybe this is now how they think Americans think, that Americans are now so identitarian that this is fine and that it all fits. And I don't know about that at all. I think they are leaning into a kind of cultural liberalism that Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton and many Democrats have been very careful to pay obeisance to. Right? The acceptance of gay marriage was on the grounds that gay marriage was a bourgeoisifying effect, that all gay people wanted to do was live the normal life that heterosexuals were allowed to live, to be married, to have children, to live, to have the tax code work for them, and to live in a house together and have Christmas and have Easter, and everybody loves everybody and love is love and all of that. It wasn't have your trans son go into a locker room, or, have somebody beat your daughter by 20 laps in swimming because that person is 6'3" with the physical morph of a male.
Well, and worse, then have to embrace that as a representation of tolerance and equality.
Right.
Or equity, Kamala's other favorite word.
Well, that's the demand. And maybe people aren't going to have the language. And we've already seen this. People aren't us, and they don't have the language to say why this is terrible or why they think
they have
it's
the
awful.
Intuition, though. They
have the intuition.
Yes.
And they also know when they're being handed a line, and they also know to go in a voting booth and vote against it without telling pollsters that that's why they're voting against it. I think that the Harris people are, on the one hand, I think it's superficially, it's very smart, because it's another piece of uniting glue for this new Harris coalition of the young and the progressive and the this and the that, and it's all working and everything's working for her. She's firing on all cylinders. Look, the Yankees had 2 really good months at the beginning of this year, and they looked like they were going to win 120 games. And then when they settled in, now they're struggling. So she's having a great first couple. Remember, baseball's 9 innings. She has 100 days to go. What looks like it may be a really great strategy in April may not be working well in July for the Yankees. And her strategy here of uniting the cultural liberalism under her banner may not work for her in October, when she needs white males to start entering her coalition so she can win in Michigan and Wisconsin, if this comes down to being exactly the same election that it was in 2016 and 2020, which is what it feels like. Abe, I have been like filibustering, and you are.
No, I don't understand who I don't know how it helps to have these affinity groups for you. The only people that are rushing to do it are the white dudes themselves, who, or the white women or whomever, who embrace any opportunity to virtue signal, to show that they're on the right side of things, and that they're a good person, and that they're not racist and they're not bigoted. I don't know. It doesn't get anyone in. You're already there. If you say yes to a Zoom call that's called white dudes or white women for anything, you're already in the camp. You're already voting for Kamala. I don't. You're this. it only has the potential to put off anyone outside this bubble.
Right. So the question is whether it's giving the Republicans and Trump and Vance material, because right now they're on the defensive. Right. The weird stuff. There's new stuff about Vance saying more things in fundraising letters and stuff about childlessness and all of that, and the psychopathy of people who don't have children and stuff that's just not good. It's not good. I don't care how you slice it. It's not good. But
I mean, look, on the weird thing, I think the response to the weird thing by the Trump Vance ticket should just be, this is a distraction. There are serious problems. Forget weird. Right. We have problems of we're on the verge of huge structural foreign policy, economic problems here as a result of the Biden-Harris administration. I don't know if we're weird or not. Maybe we're weird. Who cares?
Yeah.
Look what's going on in the country. I mean, I think you can dispel with the I think it's very easy to dispel with the weird thing and to get substantive on Kamala and on Joe Biden.
And let's not forget the 2020 Pew Research study, which found half of white liberal women have been diagnosed with a mental health condition at some point. Not to mock mental health conditions, but remember there was a correlation among women who, that particular group, the white women for Harris meeting group that everybody is now mocking, that uses politics as a kind of religion, a kind of sense of purpose in a way that might not actually be good for their long-term mental health.
It was a church Zoom. And that's really yeah. It was like when services, I mean, they did it in the Jewish community too. When COVID hit, we had Zoom services too. It's harder to do in the Jewish world because the Orthodox synagogues can't do it, on Shabbos. So there's certain obstacles, but even some synagogues did it too, right? This looked like that.
No, the best thing about those were, of course, the best things about all Zooms was can you bring me a cup of coffee? Like the person who didn't mute and then they're having a conversation in the background. And then, of course, the greatest thing, of course, was Jeff Toobin, but I don't want to get into that. But, who knows what happens on large Zooms.
Tragically, that seemed to be normal, not weird for him. So, yeah.
Anyway, I do think that one of the problems that Democrats and liberals have is that their cultural dominance is now so long-lived, generations of a kind of easy control of the cultural conversation, that their fingertip feel for when they're going too far has atrophied. Biden had a little bit of it because he was born in 1943 and was pro-life, all that until he could no longer be pro-life. But Harris, and this is an issue with Harris is not going to have a natural feel for when she's losing people that she could get with the things that make her comfortable saying and doing that she needs to avoid. This is a very big thing in politics, a very big thing when we do what we do five times a week. Like, could we say one thing that could destroy us? Yes. Can you do that on Twitter? Yes. People learn over time how to modulate themselves. But when they don't have when they don't have a proper feedback loop that says that's a little too far, white dudes for Harris, let's not have that meeting.
Obama
didn't do it that way.
Obama didn't have the feedback loop, but it didn't matter because he had something else.
But he's a once in a generation politician.
Yeah, but he knew, for example, that he couldn't do gay marriage. He knew that he had to wait to do gay marriage. He was at a dinner party in December of 2008. A friend of mine was in Georgetown and said, of course I want gay marriage, but I can't do it. It's a bridge too far for the American people as yet. Right. I mean, there are things. I mean,
but he didn't know that you're not supposed to say, I want to spread the wealth around.
I'm not sure
that was common in his circle.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. No, I think what there are things he didn't know. Like he didn't know that he wasn't supposed to attack the cop that thought that was
Right.
trying to protect Skip Gates's house. He didn't know that. He didn't know there are things he didn't know, but he wasn't we don't know Harris yet in this sense. I'm suggesting my sense of her, and having now finished her book and all of that, is she can have this media blocking tackle and all of that, but this is not her wheelhouse is not figuring out how to expand out to talk to people who don't live in California. And California is a very important state, and it has 12% of the American population. And yes, it's sort of the heart of American liberalism. Like without California's liberalism, Republicans would win the popular vote every time and all of that. And so it's big and it's powerful and it's smart and it's strong. It's all this, but it is a world unto itself. And her entire experience outside California came when she got elected to Senate in 2016. And now she's been in the White House. And does she know how to talk to somebody in Michigan? I don't think so. And all this stuff that we're seeing, the weird stuff and the white dudes for Harris stuff and all of that, is an indication that they don't yet understand that everybody doesn't hate Trump and everybody doesn't want liberal social solutions, and everybody doesn't think that, being like a being someone who says nice things about church-going Christians is weird. And one last thing, if I could, because it comes into my head and I'm obviously like on some weird solipsistic tear here. This thing that Trump got in trouble for last week, where he said, "Oh, my beautiful Christians. Oh, you're all my beautiful Christians. You got to vote now. You got to vote now, because then you'll never have to vote again. You have to vote now because you'll never have to vote again, because I'm going to solve everything." And it was like, you see, he's going to cancel democracy and be an autocrat, and there'll never be another election. And once again, in a very infelicitous way, he was saying something very important that normies might be able to understand if he could make it clear, but he didn't make it clear then, and it's not clear which is. Politics is too central, is too important in American life, largely because liberals are insistent on moving politics into every corner of our lives, and doing it in schools, and doing it in marriage, and doing it everywhere, and doing it in churches, and controlling everything and regulating everything. If you vote for me, I'm going to set things back on a more even keel, and you can go back to not caring about politics so much. You have to do it now because the threat is real. But one of my promises to you is that I'm going to reset the table so that you can go on with your lives unafraid that Washington is going to destroy you. Now, that's not, he didn't say that because he's not good at saying these things that way. But that's what he meant. And I'm sure that the people who are here listening to him knew that's what he meant. And if he could get his hands on this and say it right, and say it to Harris, and say, all you people want to do is bring your brand of liberalism to every dinner table, to every church, to every communal organization. You want to impose DEI on everybody. You want to impose trans on everybody. And I'm here to stop you so that American life can go back to being normal and not weird. Am I onto something here?
Very much so. I think it's a good point. I mean, I thought it was sort of typical comic Trump boasting the way he was, saying it. And then, and of course, it'll get a second punchline on Twitter when every liberal freaks out about it, and says, "Oh my God, look, he's saying he's going to cancel all elections." But yeah, no, I think it's an excellent point.
I think that he just represents that. I think that he represents that, and I think that's what Hulk Hogan at the RNC represents, right? Hogan said, the reason he said, "Look, I'm not Hulk Hogan, I'm Terry Bollea," is because he then said, I don't usually talk politics because you all know me as an entertainer. However, my name is Terry Bollea, and Donald Trump is an old, dear friend of mine, and my friend was shot a few days ago. And that sort of shook me out of this need to only ever present as an entertainer. And I figured I would have one serious conversation with you because it was personal and it was my friend and somebody I cared about. And I realized that friends of mine getting shot at political rallies is the sort of thing that wakes you up and says something's wrong here. Politics has taken over way too much of people's lives, and it is driving people crazy. That's what I thought was the implicit message, at least of all of those speeches. Even of, I don't know if we can say Kid Rock had a message, but the implicit message of the whole scene was, I don't want my friends getting shot over politics. And that was that resonates with people, whether they like Trump or not, because nobody wants politics to become, politics is supposed to be war by other means. It's not supposed to be war by war. And that, I think, was the point. And if Trump can say that, sure. But I think his candidacy and in general, his general sort of, his character that he plays represents that, because he's Donald Trump. And he's not a politician. And he's, that's the guy from Home Alone. Or that's the guy who, I always like to say, when you have had a Sesame Street Muppet made in your likeness, you have achieved a level of fame and cultural assimilation that people like Michael Jordan and Michael Jackson could probably only dream of. There's like a limited when you're a puppet on Sesame Street, right? So that's what I think he's always from the beginning sort of represented, is that I know him from this, not from politics, and that's always been implicit in the background.
But one word of warning about this weird campaign, and it is clearly a kind of, whether it's orchestrated or not, it's become a campaign on the left. By saying they're weird, if the right overreacts by, sort of mocking, I don't know, LGBTQ people, all the ways we're actually seeing this start to play out, that plays into the hands of the Democrats, because they can point to that and say, look at how intolerant they are. Look at how awful they're being. They're so mean. And AOC has already done this, right? She said, oh, look, they're just obsessed with people's sex lives. Isn't that terrible? So there's a tipping point here in terms of response to this sort of provocation that I think the right needs to be at least aware of before they respond.
That's why I think it's interesting. That's why I think it's a good hit, because good hits or good games like this not only have the effect of kind of stimulating interesting stories and, getting coverage for the thing that you want covered, but they draw attacks, and that if the attack is not clever and the attack can then reinforce the original message. And you're right that, Matt Gaetz going after the weird message is not going to be helpful to the GOP.
He needs to go after
Matt Gaetz, Lauren Boebert, Lauren, and Marjorie Taylor Greene should probably sit this one out. Shall we say? We haven't assigned a commentary recommends. I have one.
I could do one if you want.
Yeah. Okay, go fast. So let's do this.
I'll go fast. All right, I'll do this quick. But this one actually pleasantly surprised me. Lev Grossman's new book, The Bright Sword. It is a retelling in grown-up novelistic form of the King Arthur epics. And I've never read anything by Lev Grossman before, none of his novels, because I very rarely read things that are branded as fantasy writing. Because they're usually like a 10-book series, and each book is 1,000 pages, and it's always felt like kind of an investment. But the book is wonderful. It is at times almost miraculously good writing. I was floored. And again, maybe people who read Lev Grossman already know this, but this is a very different type of book. It essentially it takes place after King Arthur's death, and it is a sort of look back. Somebody shows up to Camelot in the wake of Arthur's death, and everything is sort of gloomy and, what happens now. But throughout the book, they look back at all, because the few members of the Round Table who are left are, kind of the misfits and not the Lancelots. And so you see through the eyes and the stories of these misfits, but also see, some of the more famous ones, the stories and all that. And it's just...
And the book again, title?
The Bright Sword.
The Bright Sword by Lev Grossman, author of the Magician series, former writer for Time Magazine. Now you're making me want to read it.
It's good.
I mean, The Once and Future King was one of my favorite books as a kid. T.H. White's retelling of the Arthurian legends.
I'm surprised at how much I like, not just because the stories are great, but the book is so well written at times that it's really enjoyable.
Okay, great. The Bright Sword by Lev Grossman. We'll be back tomorrow. For Abe, Seth, and Christine, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.